Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros panel discussion about establishing and scaling a sales ops team. Before we jump into the content today, and it's going to be good content, we've got some great panelists with us. And as Shreya knows, but Robert and Matt, they're first timers, we have a little bit of a tradition here in MSP. For all of our panelists, we want the audience to get to know you a little bit before we start to talk about our amazing topic today. So Robert, I'm going to start with you. Any new hobbies that you've picked up since the start of the pandemic, or maybe skills that you've honed since it started?
That's a great question. I've really gotten into making furniture. I recently moved into this house of mine, and I've decided that it looks really, really creepy without any furniture in it, and furniture is expensive. So with some extra time on my hands, I've made a coffee table, some shelving. So really trying to become more handy in my life. So that's a skill set that I've acquired during this pandemic.
That's pretty awesome. Like a coffee table, not like a seventh grade woodshop coffee table, but like a good one.
I would like to think it's better than seventh grade quality, but I guess everyone has their own opinion. I'm getting better each time. Iterations, awesome. Iterations.
And the good part about it is you keep practicing, right? We're still in pandemic, so we still got some more time.
Right. That's right. No one's coming over here to judge me on it yet. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Robert, for sharing that. And Matt as well, a longtime MSP member, but first time panelist here. Any new skills or hobbies that you've picked up since the start of the pandemic?
I mean, for the most part, being stuck at home, I've done a lot of DIY, right? Like you're here, yes. And there's just a lot of things to fix. So also, like Robert, trying to be a little more handy.
Well, that's great. And Matt is actually calling us from a cabin in the woods too, or cabin out in the sticks somewhere, which is great. And then we have Shreya. Shreya's joined us a few times in the past, but Shreya, glad to have you with us here today as always. And for you, any new hobbies you've picked up or skills that you've started to hone since the start of the pandemic?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of a skill this is, but I've learned to tune out two toddlers constantly running right above me as I try to work. We do a nanny share here at our place, and the walls in SF are ever so thin. So really learning how to tune that out while I try to get some work out.
I think that's not a skill. I think that's a superpower, Shreya.
A survival skill, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And just remember this later when Shreya is talking about working with sales, and she's got this superpower to just tune them out. So I kid.
Well, I also say it because you might hear them. So
we love it. That's actually one of the great parts about it. Occasionally we see pets. Oftentimes we see children kind of running in and out. It's always an exciting adventure. But we're going to go ahead and get started here as folks are still trickling in. Panelists, thank you so much for your time today. For our audience members, today we're going to be talking about establishing and scaling a sales ops team. Today's event is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are individuals that are in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our community is about 5,000, 6,000 different organizations have members in our community. And the goal of our community is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. So whether that's pulling together an amazing group of panelists like what we have here today to talk about a very pertinent topic that we're all thinking about, or through our online discussion, through research, and hopefully at some point in time in the future, we'll get back to in-person events where we can all have a beverage together and talk about these topics. Free for members, everything is free for members, I should say, and everyone on the call today will be invited to join afterwards. If you're not already a member, I'd highly encourage you to do so. But as I said before, today's program wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of the team at Delegate. I hand it off to Robert to say a few words about Delegate. Robert?
Rich, thank you. So for those of you who don't know, Delegate is a modern subscription service and technology platform for the technical side of revenue operations. So think Salesforce admin as a service. We're experts in the go-to-market systems that help companies measure, retain, and grow your customer relationships. So think CRM, marketing automation, sales outreach, CPQ, all the glorious tools that power your business. Unlike traditional firms, our model is based on pragmatism and agility. So our team of trusted experts will leverage their breadth of experience from our growing portfolio of emerging businesses and act as an extension of your team, right? Which allows you to focus on the strategic side of the house, and we focus on staying uniquely connected to the ebbs and flows of that strategy and adjust the technology to the needs of your business. Our entire team of experts is US based. We don't actually believe in hourly billing or restrictive SOW processes, which is really what allows us to encourage agility within a revenue ops organization. And we focus mainly on creating real value for our customers, and all this for a flat monthly fee, which is available on our website at delegate.team.
And I had the chance to get to know the team at Delegate for a while. They've been longtime advocates for MSP, but excited to be working with them on the sponsorship. And they are no joke. I would encourage everybody here who's thinking about, as you scale your organization, do give Delegate a look. What they're doing is pretty interesting. And it is a no BS model. The prices are on the website, which is very, very rare. And so thank you, Robert and Delegate team, for the sponsorship. But let's actually get to meet our panelists here. So today we're going to be talking about establishing and scaling a sales ops team. This is a very exciting topic. I think 5 or 10 years ago, sales ops was really just, I need a report from Salesforce. Can you help me out? You look kind of smart. Can you do this for me? And it's come so far. And it's exciting to now talk with these panelists about how do we really build that and make it a strategic differentiator in our business, hire and grow. So Robert, if you could please introduce yourself, and then we'll give it to the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, Robert Sir here, co-founder of Delegate. And so, we started the company about 3 years ago now. My background is actually as a product leader at B2B SaaS startups, right? And so quite often I would find customers of ours struggling to maximize the value of their investments into technology, right? So whether it was lacking resources or time or the knowledge internally, a lot of the times the technical prerequisites for optimizing and maximizing your tech spend, there were hiccups and speed bumps and bottlenecks on the road to that. And so, what I found was that the reason why this was happening, a lot of it was because there weren't a lot of good options, right? So you can either hire someone full time, or you can, spend the time to manage a traditional consulting firm. But ultimately, I found that a lot of these emerging businesses were starting to rely more and more on technology. And there wasn't a framework for being able to maintain that. And so what we've done at Delegate is try to implement some of the best practices that I've seen in the product development world, and apply those in kind of the technical side of the revenue operations house, while also providing a meaningful career path for a group of technical experts and admins on our side. So really looking forward to this conversation and sharing kind of my experience in the product development world with the group here in the revenue operations world.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Robert. Hey, everyone. I'm Shreya Ravikumar. I'm a leader in our sales and support operations team at Intercom. I've been at Intercom for about 3.5 years. And so much of what my team really does is focus on a variety of things like sales strategy, operations, process, governance, metrics and reporting, making sure everyone's following the rules of engagement, partnering closely with systems and enablement. So the whole gamut. So really excited to be here today and talk to all of you about how to grow a sales team, or a sales ops team, sorry.
Thank you. My name is Matt Sansone. I work at Lunch Darkly. I currently lead the team that manages both the enablement and operational needs here at Lunch Darkly. In terms of my background, I actually started in accounting of all places, but quickly realized I had a passion for complex business decisions. This took me through the finance department at first, and then into sales operations. As of now, right, I just really enjoy working along sales leaders and figuring out how to grow and scale revenues. So also very excited to be here and happy to talk with all of you.
And thank you all so much for taking some time. I know you're incredibly busy individuals. For our audience members here, just 2 housekeeping notes. Please do use the Q&A panel. We have Robert, Shreya, and Matt for the full hour. Make sure you get the most out of your time here by asking questions. We've got some good content to go through too. And then secondly, the recording will be available. So if you have to hop off early, we're going to be sharing that with folks probably about 24 hours after the recording is available from Zoom. So that'll be in your inbox sometime tomorrow. But with that, thanks again to the team at Delegate for pulling this together. But let's jump into this a little bit. And this is really exciting because we've got so many different perspectives here. So Robert, let's start with you. Like, sales ops, what the heck does that mean? What is it at Delegate? What do you see it doing? Like, what is it?
It's actually interesting, and I can speak for this on two sides. For us as a company internally, but also what we're seeing from our customer base. And so for us internally, we're still, an operation that's getting going in terms of a full-on revenue operations team, right? So we have a sales team of, 5 at this point, and we don't have, a robust, Marketo or HubSpot marketing automation system just yet. And so we're at a point now where revenue operations for us is, I just need this report. I need this field on a page layout, right? And so, for us internally, I think anyone who's on the revenue side, those on marketing, those on sales, they're kind of stretching into the operations role a little bit, right? And then couple that with someone who can just get the technology, some of these quick technology requests done. That's what it means for us internally, but we're small. For some of our customers who are larger than us, what I see is, and again, I can bring these analogies up, but in the product world, we had product management, we had development, and then we had, marketing and support, right? And I see that similarly across our customer base, where this discipline is becoming a little bit more structured, right? As you said, Rich, at the top, it used to just be, hey, just knock out these tickets that we have for Salesforce requests. But now you're starting to see, okay, there's a strategy side of it, which I see more of as product management function. There's a technology side of it to implement that strategy, right? Which I see kind of, what developers do in the product world. And then you see enablement as well, right? And I see that more as like the marketing support function. And so watching actually this grow into this mature function has been really interesting to see. And I see a lot of parallels there. It'd be interesting to see what the rest of the group says. Matt, I know you're one of our customers, and I'll leave some of that to you in terms of how we've seen you grow, obviously, with your role at LaunchDarkly.
Yeah, and I think one of the exciting parts, Robert, you touched on a lot there, is this notion of it is really evolving, and the discipline is getting more respect, and it's doing more and more, and it's kind of got a seat at the table now, for lack of a better word. And I think, Shreya, we were joking around about this before we came on, and Shreya's like, oh my goodness, my title is so long, and is that okay? And it's like, no, that's great. That's what we want. That's where ops is going. But Shreya, it'd be helpful to give an overview as well as what the heck Intercom means when they talk about sales ops and all of that.
Yeah, definitely. So organizationally and strategically, we think of it in sort of 3 categories, not unlike actually some of the things that Robert just mentioned. So we have 3 wings called core ops, systems, and enablement. Core ops kind of largely focusing on overall strategy, process, governance, metrics and reporting, incentives, setting up deal desks, et cetera. So everything from the very strategic to tactical of making the business just run. And as supported by the second wing, which is systems, which is the team that really thinks about your go-to-market tech stack and the strategy there. Everything from, your basics of Salesforce to all the other productivity tools we want to integrate into our ecosystem, and really even thinking broader than that on go-to-market, right? It's not just contained to sales. How do these systems talk to billing, Marketo, like the entire ecosystem, if you will? And of course, they also span into the tactical side of things of like the help desk, issue resolution, and whatnot. And then the third wing is enablement, which simply put is sort of the learning and development piece, right? Which again spans strategic to tactical, everything from thinking about broad topics like sales methodology and how do you, prepare a sales organization to scale and be consistent in how we do our selling processes, et cetera, to some of the more, tactical things like, hey, learn how to fill out this like workflow, or, managing our knowledge management system and being sort of the communication hub for our sales organization, who are thrown at with a million things every day. And, also things like, managing SKOs and stuff like that. And then I think a fourth unspoken piece or often unspoken piece about what sales ops does is playing chief of staff, right? Rich, to your point about getting more strategic and having a seat at the table, we're increasingly, being the advisors to our sales leaders and very much having the seat at the table and playing that sort of chief of staff role and, sort of jack of all trades as well. So that's kind of how we think about it at Intercom.
Sure.
I think
And
that's
this, oh, sorry, I was just going to ask Shreya a
go ahead,
follow-up.
Robert.
I
Yeah.
was just, just in terms of, obviously you're Intercom, pretty mature organization.
Mhm.
Does the entire ops team at your organization share common KPIs or share common metrics? Or is there kind of sub metrics or sub KPIs that each of the departments have individually? How do you measure kind of success of each of the subdivisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually hard to have very precise KPIs that can be
Yeah.
shared across all three teams. So in our road mapping process, we do have, OKRs based on individuals and roles and, the organizations. But what we do is we bubble all of that up into themes. Because there's a lot of the things that we do can't be done singularly by a single team, right? As an example,
Mhm.
we rolled out CPQ earlier this year. While that traditionally seems to just fit the systems part of the world, the core ops side is the team that understands the business challenges and helps describe sort of the business requirements that are needed. The systems team builds that out from a technical perspective, and the enablement team helps educate the reps on that. So this is like a theme that we have on our roadmap that we're all jointly responsible for. But the specific day-to-day things that we do to contribute to that are just different. And so I would say our shared goals are more at the thematic level versus at specific KPIs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just
think
going to
that
chime
that's
in that we also rolled out a CPQ tool this year. That is a project that should not be underestimated. There is a
Yeah.
lot that goes into that.
Yeah, and I think that's the fun part about the elevation of this, right? I love the chief of staff analogy here, and I love the banter. And I don't want to get in the way of it too much, but I do want to make sure, Matt, what the hell does sales ops mean, right? What does that actually look like at launch Darkly?
Sure. A lot of what I've said is about to say is going to just echo what Shri was saying. We have 3 core competencies, right? Like enablement, tech, and what I call the shadow finance org. And I think Shri called that's core ops for them, right? And enablement, right, covers onboarding, SKO, and most importantly, our sales methodology. Technology, right? Like that's Salesforce, and then they're going to manage the CPQ tool, Marketo, all the stuff all the tech stack. And then the channel finance org is, you often employ former finance and accounting people, handle revenue modeling, CAC spend, territory carving, comp plans, all that stuff. Basically, anything that you really need to be good at with spreadsheets to do, that's your shadow finance org.
And Matt, I know you've been a part of huge growth at Launch Darkly. How would you say the function of sales ops, or what sales ops mean at Launch Darkly, has that changed since you've been there, right? Has that evolved? I'm sure it has, but would love to get into detail around that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's evolved so much as we've just like added headcount and added become more refined in the way that we do it. Like for example, CPQ, right? That we didn't have that a year ago. We kicked that off, implemented it. That I consider that to be like a refining of our processes. But conceptually it was always there. I don't know if that helps.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's something too that's interesting, right? This evolution of of sales ops into rev ops, right? That moving from being maybe a little bit more of a response, break, fix, ticketing type discipline into to Shreya's point, the chief of staff. One thing I did actually, Shreya, I want to ask you is kind of similar to what Robert was talking about before. How has that evolved? Because you've actually got a very broad remit. Has it always been that way since you've been at Intercom, or was there an inflection point where more and more fell onto the sort of the universe of ops?
Yeah, not at all. So when I joined Intercom, we were a much smaller sales ops team, but I will say credit to our sales leader who very much put stock in building out this team and recognized this team as a very key strategic partner in building her own sales org and making sure that it's very successful. So early on, we I think much like very young companies, focused heavily on the system side of things. And I would say in the more tactical sense, but as the business evolved, and we'll talk more about this in terms of hiring and scaling, but I strongly believe that the way you evolve a sales org has to be tied with your sales strategy and your go-to-market strategies. And maybe you're a little ahead of the curve from that. but important to invest upfront and involve it, so as your sales organization gets more complex, or example, like it moves more up market, the nature of the deals that you're going to be doing are very different. Therefore, the kind of tooling and support you need will be very different. So, when you're a baby company, you might not quite be thinking about motions like outbound yet, right? Or introducing CPQ because your product complexity is not that complex. But as you evolve, you start introducing, these types of themes and into your strategy. And that's where you then start overlaying that with like, how is sales ops going to support those elements? And, building out maybe more specialization, or bringing out, teams like a deal desk, right? Which you don't need when you're a young company.
Right. Right.
But as you evolve and get more complex, you're going to need capacity like that. So it's come a long way.
Yeah. Shreya, and maybe Matt too. It's interesting. Shreya, for you, does the systems team under your sales ops umbrella also help out like marketing ops as well as like renewals and the tools that they use, or is that separate? Has it always been separate? Has it always been together? Walk me through how the scope of what the sales ops tech team actually owns. It starts to evolve.
Yeah. So from an ownership perspective, the sales system teams very much is responsible for our sales tech stack, but you can't really separate them from, needing
exactly.
to cross-functionally partner with marketing or finance, because all these systems absolutely talk to each other. And in our case, we use Intercom as well as a customer communication channel. So we need to make sure that Intercom is integrating with our Salesforce instance, in addition to all the other sort of productivity tools that we leverage. So the remit is, the sales tech stack, yet it's very, it's very cross-functional in nature. So the team definitely interacts with all these other teams that I just mentioned.
Got you. So in your organization, marketing has their own tech resources to manage, the marketing automation systems, and finance has their own. Okay. And then renewals, same thing. Okay.
So we do have a go-to-market. I'll say we do have a go-to-market systems committee, a steering committee, if you will.
And that's a combined.
These functions, and actually it didn't used to be this way, but as we've sort of like grown in our complexity, we have a dedicated technical PM that actually helps get these different functions together and drive.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Like, when does sales ops become rev ops, right? And Matt, I know that evolution too happened with you, because I know for a while there was like, all right, client success needs some systems, right? Marketing needs some systems, sales team needs some systems. And at some point, I know you realize like, no, these are all connected. We need to bring this together.
Well, so we actually, in the evolution of things, we did bring it all together, and then we've now kind of split it back apart, if I'm being honest with you. So
let's talk about that.
There's like this movement to go to RevOps, and that isn't something that really worked for us. And what we found, or at least the direction we're heading now, is that we've carved out tech as its own team. In almost like so, it goes between sales and marketing, and that's Salesforce Marketo as one thing, and where sales operations really actually kind of just encompasses enablement and the strategy shadow finance work that I was talking about, and that's it. So we don't really own Salesforce anymore, but they come to us for all the strategic needs they need to do in Salesforce.
Got you. That's really interesting.
Go ahead, Rich. I was going to say, we've had a lot of conversations about this. It's mostly about the first step of that journey, Matt. So the folks moving from sales ops to a more holistic rev ops organization, and not that decompression. What was it that caused that kind of desire? You said your kind of organization didn't feel maybe totally ready for it. What kind of led to the decentralization after centralizing everything?
I think at some point we're going to talk about technical versus strategic tracks.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And when you think about systems being technical, like the skill sets there are totally different, and they often operate in like sprints, right? Like they operate like coding teams, where they're they're making changes in Salesforce. They go through a bunch of testing that doesn't break anything else downstream. It's a different behavior than a strategic kind of like working with sales leaders or sales methodologies. And then that's also different than like creating campaigns in Marketo and doing all of your lead gen stuff. And so it doesn't really, like when you try and combine all of it into one team, you end up like just trying to put too much into one bucket. Whereas having this middle team, we call it a business systems team, that owns the whole tech stack, that's working really well for us. And I know it's not trendy right now, but that is something I believe in. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And Matt, just to add to that, it's actually interesting because when, you know, as a product leader in kind of the smaller organizations that I worked for in the past, we did something very similar, right? Like you would have product managers or product leaders focus on their product area or their part of the, in your case, you know, marketing, sales versus success, right? So they would focus on the strategy and business requirements for that specific piece of functionality. But oftentimes they would share technical resources, you know, and so, you know, from a business perspective, being able to separate the strategies and keeping accountability for each of the different strategies that are out there. But, you know, sharing a common pool of resources from a technology perspective is actually helpful because there's a lot of dependencies, right? And just as both of you mentioned, you know, you can't have marketing automation without it being dependent on the CRM. You can't have Zora without it being dependent on the CRM. You can't have, these systems can't live in a silo. And so the idea of, you know, having, you know, a product team that is somewhat together, but have their own focuses. In your case, you have different business units, and then having a technology team that is closely coordinated, even though they're operating on different projects, is actually really, really important because technology, as you all know, can't be built in a silo. So that's actually a really interesting move, Matt. And I know, sure, you said you guys have like a council, a go-to-market system council. That's also a really interesting idea. I think it seems like those have been tremendously helpful.
Yeah, we went off. We had some good conversation there. And Matt, I know you hit on this a bunch, but anything else to add on that kind of technical versus strategic point? I think that's an important inflection point you make as you think about scaling and building your org, right? From the first hire up to, you know, a team of maybe 10 people. Anything else to add on that point?
I guess like when we talk about like a purely technical track, for us, that means headed towards a Salesforce developer, Salesforce architect, right? That's the pinnacle of a technical role in the way that I view it. While a strategic track really can be split between operations or enablement pretty easily, right? And, you know, when you're first starting out as an organization, your first sales ops hire should almost always be someone technical to manage your CRM, right? If your CRM is not working, you're gonna have issues, right? And to add to that, strong sales leaders are able to handle most of the enablement needs of an organization in the early stages, right? They know how to enable their AEs. So you don't need somebody purely dedicated to that. But as that sales leader, right, you've got your technical hire, your sales leader, you're growing. That very next thing you're going to find is that you're going to need somebody whose core competency is that strategy, is that comp plans, territories, shadow finance. So first person you bring in is going to be somebody to help manage your CRM and the data, because data is like everything. And then you need somebody to look at the data and help you guide the business.
And there's a couple. Oh, go ahead, Shreya.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I actually agree with a lot of what Matt said, but I think calling this technical versus strategic is a little misleading because there's actually strategic elements. I think all three of the, you know, the pillars that we've been talking about. I mean, while technical is, you know, in the traditional sense of it, very much uniquely refers to like the systems team, or is often referencing the systems team. There are a lot of, you know, more specialized skills in some of the other areas that we've talked about, including, you know, what we call core ops, you know, folks that are these like analytical superstars, increasingly, you know, need to have the SQL prowess, which I would consider a technical skill as well. And conversely, I think on the systems side, you need to start, you know, at some point thinking about your tech stack more strategically, where there's overlap, where do you need to rationalize things, how are you building out your roadmap? So I would, I guess, just say I would challenge sort of the notion of there's two tracks of technical versus strategic. I think both elements sort of exist in all three pillars, and it's just a matter of maybe more of which sub function you're hiring first versus thinking of this as like or maybe even thinking of it as like tactical versus strategic in terms of
Yeah.
early days, just needing to keep the lights on and building,
Yes.
hiring for those folks versus the technical word, I suppose.
I would echo that. Like, I don't know anybody on my team who's not both technical and strategic, right? These are personality traits in a lot of ways. So that is a fair call out.
Well,
Yeah,
I think it's
I'll go ahead, Rich.
I was going to say it's an interesting distinction to make there because it does start to impact how you hire as well, right? If you, depending on how you've got this kind of broken up, and I know Shreya, it's something that you've spent some time with here, and we're going to talk about scaling a little bit next. But how does kind of that distinction shape a little bit of your point of view on how you hire?
Yeah, I mean, on that front, I'm actually quite aligned with Matt. And I think of it as like, again, early days, you're doing things to keep the lights on almost, right? So hiring, some of your first hires should be that systems admin type of role, getting the basics set up. And that might also be, the era where you use or outsource help for some of the more, call it strategic things or the bigger projects, if you will. But similarly, a close second or third hire for me would be a generalist on the sales ops track, someone who can start getting into things like metrics and reporting, setting up processes, and getting leaders set up for things like forecasting, et cetera. So I would say those are probably my early hires and the way I would think about starting a new function or organization from scratch. And then I do agree with Matt that enablement, while extremely critical in the very early days, could be something that sales leaders take the responsibility for. But very quickly, as your org scales, you need to introduce that role because things like onboarding and ongoing learning and development, partnership with your marketing team in terms of the storytelling, all of that becomes very critical. And there's probably that inflection point where all of these three functions need to be built up pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, on our side, just what we've seen, just going back to the tactical versus strategic, I find that a lot of customers that have a really robust, sales ops function that are running lean, but also very, very productive and efficient, are those that have hired someone or hired people that are really versatile, right? So, we've been brought on to different accounts or different companies where, the stakeholder that we work with, started off as the admin. They just did the tactical stuff all the time. But the reason why we need to be brought on board is because, it needs to become more strategic, right? They need to start thinking about systems holistically. They need to start thinking about roadmap for 12, 24 months instead of just taking care of the day-to-day stuff. And to find someone that can transition into that role is actually, obviously makes it a lot smoother for the companies. And for us, we see that versatility allows for a lot of optionality. Right. So this person can flex into the technical role if for whatever reason there's a heavy week, right? Board meeting coming up, we need to get reports ready. But also to be able to then flex into a role that's more holistically owning the tech stack and bringing on, a partner or, hiring someone else to do some of the technical work. We've seen that to be a pretty smooth transition for sure.
Yeah, and I think this is actually, we've started to hover around this a little bit, but this is our last kind of big topic area is just on this hiring and scaling, and how do you scale it up? And I know Shreya, you touched on this a bunch, but just again to recap, kind of if you're building it from scratch, from the ground up at maybe a high growth company, where would you start? What would the first hire be? What would the second hire be? How would it evolve?
Yeah. I mentioned this earlier, but it is very, very critical to scale your ops team as aligned with the broader sales strategy and potentially go-to-market strategy. I also really, super biased opinion here, but I do think it's very important to invest early upfront in ops. But of course, this organization won't grow linearly to your sales org, nor should it. If it is, we're not doing our jobs right. But getting set up early is important. And so to that end, I think a lot of my early hires will, if I had to hire a team of 5, as an example, it'll probably be like a couple of system admins, a generalist or two, and then maybe maybe an enablement head early on. And then I think you think about, moving from a generalist or maybe a more specialized track, if you will, as your company evolves, your go-to-market strategies evolve, the complexity of your business evolves. So again, as an example, early on, when I hired my analysts on my team, they were all sort of like jack of all trades. Just there's just so much happening in those early days. You just need stopgaps, and you're just having people like pop in and out. But as we evolved, and again, our SDR team, as an example, grew to be much bigger. The complexities with marketing grew to be much greater, and we introduced concepts like outbound and programs like outbound. We started, turning some of these generalists into, I would say, pseudo specialists, where they still have like the general superpowers, but are a bit more aligned. As an example, I had someone focused on all things top of funnel, and then folks that were focused on like the down funnel motions and aligned to our regional director so that they have their individual chiefs of staff. At some point at Intercom, we had to introduce a deal desk role, which again is fairly specialized. And similar concepts apply to the systems and enablement side of the house as well. Like as an example, early days, you invest heavily in like the admin type roles. Eventually, as you're evolving and taking on bigger projects that are more complex, you introduce roles like your BSA roles. And company to company, there's different philosophies here. You think about whether your developer role sits in your ops team or maybe in a centralized eng team. That you need sort of that program, product, project manager type of lens. And so you introduce sort of roles like that can manage it. Similarly for enablement, right? Like early days, it's just all about onboarding, get our reps up and running. And then you start thinking about sales methodology and bringing in folks who have those specialized skill sets. And perhaps company to company, again, this varies, but it's helpful for that team to also act like the content and knowledge management experts. So maybe someone who's really knowledgeable in that space and can manage a tool against that as well. So that's sort of how I think about the progression.
Yeah. Early on, the system admin early on, I mean, the work is pretty well defined, right? The base layer of technology that you need to get a basic level of ops up and running is pretty well defined. And so bringing in a system admin that can just make sure the prerequisites are taken care of, absolutely agree with that. However, at some point and at a certain scale, I think businesses realize that it's not only how good you are from a technical perspective and how robust the solutions are. It's about, are you building the right thing, right? Are you prioritizing the right strategies? Are you prioritizing the right technical tasks based on what you need to do for the business in the next stage of growth? And at that point, there's a certain point. Every company hits this. I'm like, oh, we need to bring on someone who is a little bit more strategic, has a bigger picture view on how to scale this team further. And we see companies all the time, prioritize that because, to be quite honest, the technology piece, I wouldn't say it's a commodity, but it's one of those things that if you're able to define the right thing to build, actually getting it built, is a skill set that we believe is something that's a little bit easier to find, right? And so really focusing on making sure you bring in the person there that can lead the technology team in the right direction and maximizing the ROI of that spend is incredibly important. And finding the people to actually build the technology, I think, there are several options for that, in our opinion. So just kind of seeing the evolution of, need some technology. All right, cool. Need some strategic work. All right, need some more technology. All right, need some more strategic work. And it seems like it's never a linear path, but rather, kind of a give and take depending on the trajectory of the sales team in general.
I think, Robert, that's a great point. And as a former product manager, I kind of see that coming out right there, right? Where it's like, if we can design this, if we can spec it well enough and explain it
100%.
well enough, it's a little bit easier to get the developers on board or the more technical folks.
Well, the other thing too, and I think Shreya, you've seen it, Matt, you've seen it, and it's at some point it gets the divide between the business side of the house and the technical side of the house also starts getting a little bit bigger, right? The technical team starts speaking really technical terms. The business side of the house starts becoming more and more distance from the technology that powers the strategy. And so what you have is this kind of gap, and the translation between the two sides actually gets harder as you scale. So bringing in business analysts, bringing in people to actually own the coordination between the two sides is actually important. I would love to get your thoughts on this, but from the strategic side and the technology side, I believe like a healthy tension is actually a good thing, right? And having somebody or a group of people kind of bringing the two sides together and making sure communication channels are remain very clear is pretty important. But I don't know. I would like to actually get your thoughts on like, do you feel a tension between the tech side of the house and strategic side of the house? Do you find that it's healthy? Would love to get your thoughts.
There's always tension there because your sales leaders are always going to push the envelope of what's possible, and your tech people are always going to be focused on, well, that's just going to break everything. So no, right? That is the root argument there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. But and I've actually seen a tale of two stories on this at Intercom, where early days that relationship was actually pretty bad, and I think it's because we very much focus on the system side being a very tactical, like get team. So things are punted over and be like, hey, go do this. This is what we need, versus being strategic partners. I think since then, as we sort of like hired in the right leaders and folks like who have that BSA strength and can speak the sort of like that business talk and be translators, it's been a world of a difference in terms of the relationship. And we now again have joint roadmaps. We have like, regular check-ins meetings. And I think that's important, right? Because the business side brings in like the pain points and the problems to be solved, and the technical side pushes us on like, great, this is how you can solve it. It may not be perfectly how you were originally approaching it, but here's a better way, or potentially here are some limitations. And so I think that's really important if you're thinking about scaling and setting ourselves up for success.
Yeah, 100%. And like, to be honest with you, as product managers, I don't know if all product managers feel this way, but I felt like a imposter syndrome. Like, what do I actually do? Right? Like, I don't know if you've seen The Office Space, the scene where he's like, oh, I bring the requirements up from the sales team down to the engineer. I mean, it simplifies that role, but that role is incredibly important. And so, in the product world, like we definitely didn't have engineers talking to our stakeholders or customer or the users of the product, right? It's just not in the skill set. And so and because of that, this whole, practice of product management or business analyst is a critically important part of the business. And so on the revenue ops side, I do encourage companies to start thinking about this, right? Again, the tech, I think a lot of companies make the mistake of, oh yeah, we have a Salesforce admin, everything's fine now. It's like, there has to be someone managing that and owning that and being the bridge between the folks that are really, really good from a technology perspective, keep them in their strength, have them focus on things they're really, really good at, and finding someone and emphasizing more of someone owning this and being that bridge between the two sides is actually critically important. The technology side, as I said, it's once you get down to the translation of business requirements, once you're able to build momentum and drive adoption, technology side actually becomes the most trivial part in our opinion. So just something to think about, and hopefully that resonates with both you and Matt, you and Shreya.
Not at all. I think the technology part is so critical.
It is. It is 100%.
Yeah, I think there's something there's a lot of very strategic elements to that side of the house. I could not live without my systems partners at all, ever.
So we worked with Delegate for the last, how long has it been, Robert? Year and a half?
Has it been that long? Time has flown by.
Time means nothing these days, right? We're all stuck at home.
Right.
What we found, right? So we have an in-house Salesforce administration, right? But we are not like they're just not at a developer or architect level. And so while we maintain and own all of the strategic decisions around Salesforce, all of the really complex technical goals that we have, we're outsourcing to Delegate. Even today, right? We're probably at the size where we should be looking to hire an in-house developer, but we just haven't had to, right? We just have continued to rely on this relationship. And it's just been really successful for us because developers are really expensive. And a lot of times some really good Salesforce developers I've met don't have that business language, that BSA that you treat, right? And so you hire that really technical person who leads the Salesforce thing, and all of a sudden you get into that situation where they don't speak business speak, and you're in trouble. So
by context is so important.
Yeah. And so by continuing to own the strategic side of Salesforce, but being able to outsource all of the technical builds, it's been really successful for us.
Yeah, and Matt, that's been critical to our relationship too, is the fact that you have someone internally that we can rely on, right? To make sure that the business requirements are translated properly to us. You've made it so that there is a single point of or basically a single point of contact in terms of the strategic direction that you want to take, and kind of just leaving us to fill in the gaps and execute as needed. So I think the way your team has and org has evolved is tremendous, and and that might change. Once you start growing to the size of Intercom, that might change. But where you guys are at, how many Salesforce licenses are you supporting or seats you're supporting, Matt? I forget what it is now.
I don't. We're pushing 100.
Okay. Yeah.
And Robert, there will be a sunset on the relationship at some point, right?
Of course.
We're gonna hire 6 or 7 developers, and that's
100%.
Right?
100%.
And you helped us get there. That's
100%. 100%.
This has been great, and I do want to make sure we get a chance to get some Q's and A's from the audience here. One that I want to fire through kind of each of you. You've all been part of these sort of high growth organizations. You've seen it. And Shreya, I want to start with you, just from like a ratio perspective. When is that time when the second person in the sales ops team joins in? Like, how many salespeople is it? Is that even the right way to think about kind of hiring your second sales ops person?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't put a ratio for the second sales ops person. I'd probably put a ratio maybe for the 10th sales ops person. Because as I mentioned previously, I feel very passionately about investing early in sales ops. I think regardless of your starting size of your sales org, and listen, when I say starting size, sure, when it's like a couple of reps, you're not going to build out a full-fledged sales ops team. But even something north of like 10 to 15, you really want to start thinking about that second, third, fourth hire, because you want to be a little ahead of the curve of hiring sales ops, knowing that the sales org is going to scale, and preparedness for that sales org to scale responsibly. So again, I think some critical early roles will be like the admin, at least one generalist, and maybe a second admin before an enablement person. So I think there's about 3 or 4 roles that are just for me easy upfront to hire, and then thereafter, I honestly don't know that I have a very strong opinion on what the end ratio is eventually, but I do think at some point, there's sort of the small team, you start really growing it, and then there's a point at which it's maybe onesies, twosies that you're adding every year, whereas the sales org itself might be growing at a much steeper scale.
There's a lot of leverage that you get out of the ops people, especially once you've got that foundation in place, like we've discussed. Like, it kind of, you get momentum, you get projects done. The sales team can operate more efficiently.
That's right.
Yeah. Robert, have you seen any inflection points with that, just in both the kind of the research that you've done and also since you've been at Delegate?
Yeah. So we do encounter 2 scenarios quite frequently. One is sales operations being led by head of sales, right? At which point, the sales leader has no idea what to do with their systems, right? Okay, fair. All right, we're brought in as the first sales ops person, and we're a sales systems administrator. There's other customers that we have that have an ops team, but that ops team consists of somebody that is doing everything, right? So a little bit of requirements gathering, a little bit of enablement, a little bit of deal desk, a little bit of system administration, and there's this versatile, can do it all type player. The time you need to start bringing in a second operations hire, and we consider that us in some cases, is when this person is starting to spend upwards of 50-60% of the time just interacting with the rest of the business, right? And so there's going to be a point in time where this leader is spending most of the time reporting back to leadership, collecting feedback from the field, and there's no time to actually do any of the work, right? And so this person that you may have hired to be more tactical, and maybe your systems administrator, ends up being one that has to just collect all the feedback, collect the requirements, and herd the sheep. At which point, that's the right time to bring on another hire or bring on someone like us to help augment that resource.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a couple different ways to go about this, and I think those are both really, really great perspectives there. Another question, and this is a live question coming in, and Matt, let's maybe start with you on this, and you can provide some perspective on what you've seen, and then certainly Shreya and Robert, I'd love your opinions as well. Question coming in here from Joshua. Yeah, Joshua, got that right. How are you seeing B2B2C SaaS businesses set up sales ops organizations? Matt, you want to get started with that, and then Shreya and Robert, you guys can hop in too.
Sure. I'm gonna be honest. I don't even know if the B2B2C thing is that relevant. Like, if we're talking about SaaS, that to me is enough. And it kind of follows the trend that everyone's saying, right? You still end up with the 3 core competencies, right? If you've got your tech covered, you've got to get your strategic side, right? Your territories, your comp plans, all that data and like analysis kind of taken care of. And you also have enablement. And those, if you're covering those 3 competencies, it's going to cover all of your different organizational types. And in this, there's been a lot of talk about, should your second hire be a utility player or some sort of like, what's the right skill set? And the answer there is that it kind of depends on the sales leaders and the current team you have, right? If your sales operations person is incredibly strategic and they need help on the tech side, you immediately bring in delegate. If your salesperson is like really good on the tech side, right, then you need that strategic person to come in. And your sales leader will also help you know that, right? Because you're gonna probably mirror some of these skill sets with the sales leader. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd maybe just add that, when companies are really young, that generalist sales ops person could also be a little bit of a shared resource, depending on whether the company has like a biz ops team, or maybe there's a finance resource that, hops in 50% of the time to sort of help sales. At some point, that does have to become a dedicated sales ops role. But I think there's a lot of also resource sharing early on that you don't necessarily have to strictly hire for.
Yep. And just something really tactical from the B2B2C side. Build really good relationships with your core product and engineering teams. Typically when it's more high volume, consumer based, or if you have self-service signups, you're going to need some of the information in terms of what's going on in the product, what's going on the platform. So build strong relations with that team. We're going to need them because eventually that information needs to make its way over to the sales systems, right? And so that's something we've seen a common pattern of anytime you're in B2B2C or kind of you have self-service signups. That collaboration is also very important.
I want to reiterate what Robert just said, because it's a great point. I think it's oftentimes missed, that interconnection between things like products, analytics, like how people are actually using your stuff, and your CRM. That's almost always a hell of a lot of work for somebody on one or both sides of that equation. Yes. Anybody that's been in product-led growth knows if you don't understand how people are using your stuff, it's really, really hard to figure out how to market to them, move them along, and get selling. That's a phenomenal point there. So a couple more questions here, and I want to ask, and this is a little bit, and I know it's a little bit of an it depends question. When we were prepping, we talked a bunch about hiring. We've talked a little bit about hiring here as well. Shreya, when you're hiring in sales ops, are there any things that you're specifically looking for, or big red flags that you see as you're hiring, just kind of generally?
Yeah, I'd say the 2 big things for me are, and they're more value oriented, call it grit and resilience, and then having a growth mindset. This is just a role that spans so many different parts of the sort of motion, if you will, from strategic to tactical. And you need to be comfortable with that change and getting into the weeds some days, and then being able to step back and look at the big picture in other days. And there's just a lot of change that happens in the early days that you need to be resilient against that. And I think folks that I've seen be very successful have that inherent sort of quality. And then alongside that growth mindset, right? Like being willing to evolve from that generals to having maybe specialist responsibilities, being open to like, switching roles, working with, different stakeholders, and being prepared for that sort of like constant change. And so that's actually really at the top of my list is, can you be gritty and resilient? And that's the first thing I filter for in hiring.
Anything else?
Trait.
Yeah, Matt, I was going to say, it feels like those are really, really good. It's tough to add on that, but anything else that would you say?
I always like really simplify my like the way I hire people, and it kind of like starts with like, are they a good person? Do I like them? And I know that sounds cheesy as all hell, but like you always want to have people that add to your culture in a good way. And so you start there, and then I go straight into like, are they capable and smart and talented enough to handle the work? And if you answer yes to both those questions, you probably have a great hire, and you should find a fit for them.
Yeah, I think that it's always tough on that first part too. It's like, well, I like them, but the opposite, if you've ever had to try to get rid of somebody who wasn't the right fit, especially in sales, you see that lone wolf who's just a cancer on the sales team. It's a pain in the butt. Last question here, and then I will give our panelists a chance to wrap up. And Robert, I actually want to start with you on this. We've talked a lot about how this role sits at a very important intersection of, even the backside of the house from the product and engineering standpoint, all the different disciplines on the revenue side. Obviously, some folks joining us here today are a little bit newer to it. They're maybe struggling to build some business justification. How have you seen organizations build that justification for sales ops as a discipline versus somebody, maybe a smart sales engineer or a smart sales leader wearing just a ton of different hats?
That's a great question. I always like to paint the picture of what the world could be, right? So, I think starting with a roadmap that aligns clearly with the sales forecast or the hiring goals for that year or for that given period of time, right? And so it's really easy to pull up the sales forecast or the targets for the year, that the leadership team has set, and point out things that will break, right? At this volume of opportunities, our deal desk systems could break, right? There's no way we can afford to, there's no process that we can put into place to account for this many contracts that have to be signed, or that has to focus on, I can't measure, I can measure 5 SDRs, but I can't measure the performance of 15 SDRs, right? So just putting together a roadmap of the things that will, let me take that back. Putting together a list of things that will break at what growth cycle, and then backing that into a roadmap of things that need to be put in place for the business to be able to scale to that number is actually a really effective way of doing it. Now, obviously that takes someone who's very strategic to come up with that. But again, that's where, you have to justify the fact that not only do I need a technical team to accomplish this, just kind of painting the picture of the complexity of a sales tech stack and treating it like a piece of technology, right? Most of our customers and most of you sell a piece of technology, so they get the complexity, right? Try to paint the picture and present the sales technology stack as a tech stack, just like you would the product and engineering team would. And that's typically really, really helpful.
I think that's a phenomenal, I've never thought of it through that lens of like, hey, we're going to need this many contracts, right? You think about building up to a number and you go, cool, we need, 30,000 leads or whatever, but that next level, I think that's great. Folks, we are at time. That flew by. Panelists, just before we wrap here, just any key takeaways or last points you want to make to the audience before we kind of break here. And Matt, let's start with you on that. Just any key takeaways or last points for our attendees here.
I think it's important that everyone understands the importance of investing in sales operations, right? You see a lot of organizations, they're late to the show. Like they have a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats, and they're not realizing that you need to consolidate that and put everything into one like team that can really help manage these processes. So companies that invest early on are the ones that end up being the most successful.
I think it's a great point. It's like foundational to the revenue discipline. Shreya, any key takeaways or last points you want to make to the audience here before we break?
Yeah, I've learned a lot in this session. I think there seems to be some common threads like this 3-team notion, but I think the other thing I've learned today is that this is still changing a ton. We're still figuring out new ways to optimize this organization. So it was actually very helpful talking through these questions and answering some of the Q&A stuff, because it made me kind of think about other ways to do this. So very
That's
helpful.
awesome. We love it when our panelists learn and educate at the same time. That's great. And then certainly last but not least, Robert, I feel like you and I are due for a long conversation about how product and sales ops overlap.
Yeah.
I'm fired up to talk more. But no, any
Yeah.
just last key takeaways for the crew here?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway, just from our experience working with a breadth of different customers, focus on making sure you're building the right thing. Focus on making sure you know what to build. And not necessarily worry about the details of how it's going to get built, right? Don't worry about the actual execution of the technology. Plenty of great people out there, that can handle that. But if you don't nail, what to build and in what order, based on the trajectory of the business, you can have the best technical team in the world. It won't matter. It will not matter. So really, really optimize for that. And the more clarity you have on that, the more successful any technical firm or technical person will be in executing that.
I gotta say, folks, we do a lot of events at MSP. I moderate a ton of them, and I have learned more in this session than I have just about any other session so far this month. This was really, 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 really awesome. Matt and Shreya, thank you so much for taking some time to join us and share your insights. And Robert, thank you as well. In addition to thank you to the Delegate team for the sponsorship for this. On behalf of the Modern Sales Pros community, Nora and the team behind the scenes, I hope everybody stays safe, has a wonderful rest of your day, and great rest of your month. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.